So today I want to talk about an issue that caught my attention way back in April, but I've been trying to look for the right moment. And I want to just give a little disclaimer before I go into it, in that I wanted to explore this issue not with a sense of cultural superiority or any judgment or criticism, but rather as really an exploration of cause and effect at a larger scale and a social scale. Of course, we have the amazing example of our own environmental degradation as a great example of cause and effect, and although many people don't see it that way. And I think this particular example is also along those lines, and I think it showcases interdependence so beautifully, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, as well as I think being important to touch just in terms of social, social dynamics. So this article was published by the Washington Post back in April of this year, and it was titled "Too Many Men." Too many men. Too many men. And it chronicles a bit the effects of the overpopulation of men in China and India as a result of their cultural preferences and also governmental policies. So this article, for me, attempts to answer the question of what are the unintended consequences of favoring one group over another. And so, because of these cultural and governmental policies and dynamics in these two countries, they're now dealing with these very startling numbers in terms of the difference between the number of men and the number of women in each country. And I'm going to quote some statistics from the article. So in China has a population of about 1.4 billion people. There are nearly 34 million more males than females. And that was equated as the entire population of California or Poland. And these men will never find wives, some of them anyway. In India, the country also has very deeply held preferences for sons, there is an excess of 37 million males, according to a recent census. Combined, the two countries have 50 million more men under the age of 20. So they call it in the article excess males. This is not my wording, this is the article's. And so both nations are belatedly trying to address that disparity. But in the meantime, what has happened is that the society, the society at large, the families, and then the individuals are dealing with the effects, the consequences of these choices, which in the beginning, if brought them some level of status and happiness, having male heirs and enjoying the weight that carries in their society. And now, after some time have passed, then now the consequences of that shift in population are beginning to be felt. And especially because in these countries, family life, those traditional roles are so valued and respected and ingrained in the fabric of their society. The families, men and women, look at that as the ideal model for how to live in their society. Well, what happens is that now there's a number of men who cannot live by that model. They are not able to find wives. They're not able to have what they consider traditional families. So adult sons are now having to live with their mothers, their grandmothers, and having to take on what they thought are traditional women's roles. Cooking, cleaning, tending for the mother or the grandmother, which has created some gender identity tension in not only in the individual level, but also at the family and society level, as those men are no longer able to fulfill their role as males in that society. And so the degree of depression is, one professor at a university in London come up with really identifying that these men, particularly in rural areas, become very depressed because of not being able to live up to their expected social role. And so here we can see quite clearly interdependence, because how can men be men and play the role assigned to them within their culture in the absence of women? And you can see that in a very rigid society, where rigid gender roles, that when these roles are reversed, then these men undergo an identity crisis, leading them to depression and frustration, which was portrayed and chronicled in this article. But with the scarcity of women, it shows that women are now becoming a high-end commodity. Because now men and families with adult sons of marrying age are now going to great lengths to secure a bride in some villages in which there may be 2 females for 60 and 50 males of marrying age. And some of these things, for example, include basically for men working extra jobs, working at extra hard jobs to save money in order to provide a house and a bride price in China, which is what they have to pay to entice the family of a woman to accept them as in-laws. And the article chronicles that what used to be a few $100s of bride price is now gone up to $8,000, sometimes even more, for these men to have access to, a marriage and their own families. And they're going to great lengths to either also pay for actual services to connect them to marrying women, sometimes paying a lot of money, even beyond the $8,000. And so women, of course, know that they are now very much sought after, and they are becoming a lot more selective about the kind of situation they'll get themselves into. There was one report, for example, that in a village in southeastern China that had 50 to 60 bachelors in that village, but only 1 or 2 single women. In India, what they're saying is that a man over the age of 30 is now considered over the hill for marriage, and because of the scarcity of women, there are less women that are going to want to marry an older man, and so these men are slowly losing hope for securing their own family. The article quotes this number, that there are 7,000 villages in northern India that have surpluses of 150 to 200 men. So these men don't have someone to marry, a woman to marry. But another unintended consequences of this is human trafficking. And this is, a very serious problem because it's not only affecting now these two countries, but now the ramifications are spilling to border countries. Even as far as Russia and Ukraine, men from China and India are now going to look for brides, and now there are the bride tours where they go on to these countries. They pay a lot of money to go into these countries to meet eligible women, women who are looking also for husbands. And this also is a setup for abuse, in that it's been chronicled that women are being brought to China and India with false hopes of marriage and work and financial security and social status, and what they're finding are some abusive situations in which they end up being emotionally, physically, and sexually abused. And the countries that are being most affected by this are Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Burma, but they are going as far as Russia and Ukraine. And I think the other and last effect that was mentioned in this article had to do with public safety. In a particular instance, that the men are now accosting women more often, harassing more often, particularly in rural areas. And they chronicled a very, I think, interesting story about Indian girls in a rural area where they actually were being on their way to school, being harassed by young men, and they had to, the young girls had to organize a protest for several days until the government officials agreed to set a school for them in their own town so that they wouldn't have to travel to these dangerous roads to go to school. So as I think we in this country are looking at some dynamics of exclusionary policies, or policies where certain groups are being favored over another, that it would behoove us as a country, as a society, to kind of look at these examples as a cautionary tale of things, of the unintended consequences of disrupting the interdependent relationship between peoples and our environment and animals. So it's just something to be aware of the real nature of cause and effect, which can be seen over a length of days, years, lifetimes. In this case, we do have a very example that has transpired over a number of years, and so it behooves us to look at it, learn from it.